My name's Nick Kreitman. I'm an organizer with Students for Democratic Society. We're a non-sectarian, big tent leftist group, and our goals are to create institutions that will bring us towards an emancipatory society. So when we say we want free education, we also mean education controlled by students and professors. So one of our goals is to democratize education, to increase the amount of student input into classes, increase the amount of student input into decisions made by administrations. And I believe that fits in with anti-imperialism very well, because a lot of anti-imperialists today don't have a positive program to base their theories on and to use as basically examples for other people. And I think that's really been the detriment of the left in general too. When you go to UFPJ marches, they don't advance a concrete alternative to anything. The most UFPJ will do is hand you a sticker or a button that says "Troops Out Now," but they don't really elaborate on what they want after that. They don't want to elaborate on how U.S. foreign policy should look. They don't want to elaborate on how society should look. In bringing it back home to the fight against Walmart, that happened recently in the big box ordinance. Well, that was definitely an anti-imperialist struggle. I define imperialism as unequal relations, whether it's between classes, whether it's between people. It can happen in a relationship too, between a man and a woman. But it usually happens on the world stage between the Western powers and what is known as the global South. Of course, there's exceptions like Japan and China through different historical periods. But back to the example with Walmart, unfortunately, the big box campaign lost. It didn't pass the ordinance for a fair wage because there wasn't any positive something counterposed to Walmart. And there was nothing for poor communities to rally around in opposition to Walmart. The choice was Walmart and low road development or nothing, or the status quo. And I think it would really be advantageous for the left to rekindle its intellectual leadership and start presenting alternatives. I think it would have been very wise if we would have put some heads together and maybe come up with a business plan for a cooperative Walmart or a co-mart or something of that nature, where it would involve community members, it would involve worker ownership. I mean, if we advance the goals of worker ownership of the means of production, then we need to start having concrete examples so people can see it. And I think we need to start doing this in more aspects rather than just domestic struggles like the Walmart struggle. We need to start identifying alternatives for U.S. foreign policy. I believe we would be able to connect with more people who are currently apolitical if we are able to show that there is an alternative to U.S. imperialism. Because right now, we really have an undefined program in opposition to U.S. imperialism. It's basically troops out now, but nothing after. Unfortunately, the great minds on the left haven't elaborated on what the U.S. could do or what a new Iraq might look like. Of course, sovereignty should rest solely with the Iraqis, but there's some decisions that need to be articulated if you're supporting an anti-war platform. Precisely, how should the U.S. handle reparations? We've murdered millions of Iraqis over the decades and basically dismantled their entire economy, and now we want to steal their oil. Well, if we want the troops out and we want to re-engage in Iraq, how's that going to look like? If we start articulating these other options, I believe we would be able to connect with a lot of people who are sitting on the fence right now. I know everyone in this room was probably at the March 20th demo last year, but you might have noticed that there were quite a few people who weren't there. I actually left early, but I saw that there were tremendously less people out than when the war first started or during the build-up to the war. And I think these people just aren't motivated right now because they don't really see a solution. And Troops Out Now is not necessarily going to save Iraq, but it's definitely going to provide the possibility that Iraq would come out without being torn apart by a civil war. I think this is kind of endemic in the past years of the left in general, not advancing credible alternatives to U.S. foreign policy, basically imperialist policy. The same thing happened in Kosovo when we were attacking. Well, we didn't necessarily have an articulated position on how the U.S. should engage Serbia and Eastern Europe. So basically people thought that we were supporting Milosevic or the Bosnian crisis. If we were against NATO intervention to support the Bosnian Muslims, well, you know, we were supporters of genocide. No, that wasn't it. And I know people did articulate some alternatives and possible plans to resolve these conflicts, but they weren't at the head of the left. They weren't what we were advancing. They weren't in everyday conversation between people. I know myself, when I go and talk to people on my campus, that's not what they're talking about when they talk about the war. How are we going to connect with people? That's not what's being talked about, how we're going to re-engage and connect with people outside of our little circles. So I guess I'll wrap up my introduction with saying that we need to start planning and thinking and putting into action alternatives, whether it's here at home through either worker-owned industries or union buyouts of their workplaces. These are very practical steps that we need to start taking if we want to grow the anti-imperialist movement. Then we also need to identify alternatives to U.S. foreign policy and show how they have a better possibility of actually giving sovereignty to the Iraqis, how the U.S. is going to engage if we want to address the concerns of people not already involved in the leftist sphere. So yeah, that's pretty much my introduction.